Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. "When I call your name, you will be put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted," she said. "Abbott Hannah." A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment's pause. "Hufflepuff!" shouted the hat. A table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. "Bones, Susan!" "Hufflepuff!" shouted the hat again, and Susan scuttled off to sit next to Hannah. "Boot, Terry!" "Ravenclaw!" The table, second from the left, clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Harry as he joined them. Brocklehurst Mandy went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first new Gryffindor. At the table far on the left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Bulstrode Millicent then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, after all he'd heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during gym at his old school. He had always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch Fletley Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed the hat shouted out the house at once, but others took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. "Granger Hermione!" Hermione almost ran to the school and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. "Gryffindor!" shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages, until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he'd better get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted "Gryffindor," Neville ran off, still wearing it, and had to jog back amidst gales of laughter to give it to MacDougal Morrid. Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed Slytherin. Malfoy went to join his friends Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Knott, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, then Perk, Sally Ann, and then at last, Potter, Harry. Harry stepped forward. Whispers suddenly broke out, like little hissing fires all over the hall. "Potter, did you say? The Harry Potter?" The last thing Harry saw before the hat dragged over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. "Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. There's talent. Oh, my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now it's entering. Where should I put you?" Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin, not Slytherin." "Not Slytherin, eh?" said the small voice. "Are you sure? It could be great, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you to the way to greatness, no doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor!" Harry heard the hound shout the last words to the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily towards the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin. He hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer yet. Percy, the prefect, got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley twins yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the rough he'd seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry the sudden horrible feeling he'd just plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now. At the end nearest him sat Hagrid, who caught his eye, gave him the thumbs up. Harry grinned back. And there, in the center of the high table, in the large golden chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card he'd gotten out of the Chocolate Frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shone as brightly as the ghost's. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. And now there were only 3 people left to be sorted. Thomas Dean, a black boy even taller than Ron, joined Harry at the Gryffindor table. Turpin Lisa became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green by now. Harry crossed his fingers over the table, and a second later the hat had shouted, "Gryffindor!" Harry clapped loudly with the rest, as Ron clapped into the chair next to him. "Well done, Ron. Excellent," said Percy Weasley pompously across Harry, as Zabini Blaze was made Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at his empty gold plate. He had only just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasties seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms open wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, and here they are. Nitwit, Blubber, Oddments, Tweak. Thank you. He sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. Is he a bit mad? He asked Percy uncertainly. Mad, said Percy airily. He's a genius, best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry? Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of them were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he liked to eat at one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, and lamb chops, sausages, bacon, steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs. The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he'd liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry ever really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except the peppermints and began to eat. It was all delicious. That does look good, said the ghost of the rough said, watching Harry cut up his steak. Can't you? I haven't eaten for nearly 400 years, said the ghost. I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Poppington, at your service, resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower. I know who you are, said Ron suddenly. My brother's told me about you. You're Nearly Headless Nick. I would prefer you to call me Sir Nearly Headless de Mimsy. The ghost began stiffly, but sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. Nearly headless? How can you be nearly headless? Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if their little chat wasn't going the way he wanted. Like this, he said irritably. He seized his left ear, pulled, his whole head swung off his neck, and fell onto his shoulder as if it were on a hinge. Someone had obviously tried to behead him, but not done it properly. Looking pleased at the sudden looks on their faces, Nearly Headless Nick flipped his head back into his neck, coughed, and said, So, new Gryffindors, I hope you're going to help us win the house championship this year. Gryffindors have never gone so long without winning. Slytherins have got the cup 6 years in a row now. The Bloody Baron's becoming almost unbearable. He's the Slytherin ghost. Harry looked over at the Slytherin table and saw the horrible ghost sitting there with blank, staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robes stained with silver blood. He was right next to Malfoy, who Harry was pleased to see. Still didn't look too pleased with the seating arrangements. How did he get covered in blood? Said Seamus, with great interest. I've never asked, said Nearly Headless Nick delicately. When everyone had eaten as much as they could, the remains of the food faded from the plates, leaving them sparkling clean as before. A moment later, the desserts appeared. Blocks of ice cream in every flavor you could think of, apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, and jam donuts, trifle strawberries, jello, rice pudding. Harry helped himself to a treacle tart. The talk turned to their families. I'm half and half, said Seamus. Me dad's a muggle. Mom didn't tell him she was a witch until after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him. The others laughed. What about you, Neville? Said Ron. Well, my gran brought me up, and she's a witch, said Neville. But the family, I thought I was all muggles for ages. My great-uncle Algy tried to catch me off my guard and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off the end of Blackpool Pier once. I nearly drowned, but nothing happened until I was 8. Great-uncle Algy came round for dinner, and he was hanging round me in the upstairs window by the ankles when my great-aunt Edna offered him a ring, but he accidentally let go. But I bounced all the way down to the garden into the road. They were all really pleased. Gran was crying. She was so happy. And you should have seen their faces when I got in here. They thought I might not be magic enough to come, you see. Great-uncle Algy was so pleased he bought me my toad. On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione were talking about lessons. I do hope they start right away. So much to learn. I'm particularly interested in transfiguration, you know. Turning something into something else. Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. You'll be starting small, just matches into needles and that sort of thing. Harry, who was starting to feel warm and sleepy, looked up at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell was in his absurd turban, was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and swallows. It happened very suddenly. The hook-nosed teacher looked past Quirrell's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp, hot pain shot across the scar on Harry's forehead. Ouch! Harry clapped his hands as it. What is it? Asked Percy. Nothing. The pain had gone as quickly as it had come. Hard to shake off was the feeling that Harry had gotten from the teacher's look. A feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. Who's that teacher talking to Professor Quirrell? He asked. Oh, you know Quirrell already, do you? No wonder, he's looking so nervous. That's Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but he doesn't want to. Everyone knows he's after Quirrell's job. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts, Snape. Harry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last, the desserts too disappeared, and Professor Dumbledore got to his feet again. The hall fell silent.